Here's the thing about creepy small town lists on the internet. They almost always disappoint you. You click expecting something that makes your skin crawl, and what you get is, this town has an old cemetery, or legend says a ghost haunts the local library. Maybe they'll throw in a spooky photo filter and some dramatic music, call it a day. But you're smarter than that. You know that real dread doesn't come from a campfire story. It comes from an EPA Superfund designation, from census data that tells you a town lost 90% of its population in 40 years, and nobody talks about why. From a Wikipedia page that reads like it was written by someone actively trying not to say too much. This list is different. What you're about to see are 10 real American towns where the creepiness isn't conjured up by some blogger looking for clicks. It's baked into the infrastructure, the economy, the silence of the people who stayed behind. These are places where locals genuinely don't recommend visiting, not because they're protecting some secret treasure, but because they know what happens here. They've lived it. We're not going to talk about ghosts. We're going to talk about lead poisoning. We're going to talk about the conspiracy of silence when an entire town watched a murder and said nothing. We're going to talk about fire, literal underground fire, that's been burning since 1962 and won't stop until the coal runs out in approximately 250 years. If that sounds like your kind of horror, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like if you want more of this kind of deep dive, and settle in, because we're starting at number 10, and by the time we get to number 1, you're going to look at the American small town very, very differently. Number 10, Grafton, New Hampshire. Population, approximately 1,300. State motto, live free or die. And brother, did they try. In the early 2000s, a group of libertarian activists selected Grafton as the site of what they called the Freetown Project, an experiment in minimal government, voluntary association, and radical self-reliance. The theory was elegant: move enough like-minded people into a small rural community, reduce regulations to almost nothing, and watch freedom flourish. What actually happened was considerably less elegant, as the libertarians settled in and began dismantling town ordinances, cutting budgets for road maintenance, emergency services, and garbage collection. The infrastructure began to fail in predictable ways. But here's where it gets strange. The black bears noticed. See, Grafton has always had bears. But the reduced garbage oversight and the hardcore live and let live philosophy toward wildlife created an unexpected feedback loop. Some residents began feeding the bears intentionally. Others simply left garbage unsecured. The bear population grew bolder, then aggressive. By the late 2000s, Grafton was experiencing bear encounters that wildlife officials described as unprecedented. Not just sightings, attacks, property damage, bears breaking into homes, refusing to leave, and in some cases injuring residents. One woman was mauled while walking her dogs. Pets were killed. The situation became so absurd and dangerous that journalist Matthew Hongoltz Hetling wrote an entire book about it, called A Libertarian Walks Into a Bear. What makes Grafton genuinely creepy isn't the bears themselves. It's the underlying philosophy that invited them, the idea that nature would cooperate with ideology, that systems could be dismantled without consequences. Grafton feels like a warning label for a future that didn't work out. A small town that decided to test a theory with real lives and real teeth. Would you walk through those woods at dusk? Be honest. Number 9, Whittier, Alaska. Imagine a place where nearly everyone lives inside a single building, where there's exactly one tunnel connecting you to the outside world, and where that tunnel closes at night. Welcome to Whittier. This tiny Alaska town, population around 300, exists almost entirely within Baggage Towers, a 14-story former Army barracks converted into residential housing. Inside that one building, you'll find the school, the post office, the mayor's office, the church, and the grocery store. You can be born, live, work, and die without ever technically leaving the structure. Whittier was built in World War II as a secret military port, designed to survive in one of the most inhospitable climates in North America. Rainfall exceeds 200 inches annually. Winds regularly reach hurricane force. Winters bring almost total darkness. And yes, the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel, the longest highway tunnel in North America, is the only land route in or out, and it's shared with a railroad. After 10:30 p.m., you're not leaving unless it's an emergency. emergency. The social dynamics of Baggage Towers are unlike anything else in America. When everyone lives in the same building, privacy becomes theoretical, conflicts escalate without escape, relationships are amplified by proximity, residents describe both an intense sense of community and an equally intense sense of surveillance. Not from the government, but from each other. Everyone knows who came home late. Everyone knows whose marriage is struggling. There's something existentially unsettling about a town designed to keep the world out, but that accidentally became a pressure cooker for human interaction. Whittier doesn't need ghosts. Oh, it's the isolation, the endless rain, the hallways that go on, that's enough. If you stayed the winter, would you come back the same person? Monowi, Nebraska population, 1. Monowi is, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the only incorporated municipality in the United States with a population of a single person. That person is Elsie Eiler, an 80-something woman who serves as the town's mayor, clerk, treasurer, librarian, and bartender. She grants herself a liquor license. She pays taxes to herself. She fills out all the required municipal paperwork by herself. On paper, this sounds like a quirky feel-good story, and local news often covers it that way, but spend a little longer with the reality and the charm begins to curdle. Monowi was once home to over 150 people. It had a school, a church, multiple businesses. One by one, the farms consolidated, the young people left, the elderly died. Elsie's husband Rudy ran the library until his death in 2004. She keeps it open in his memory, stocked with 5,000 books he collected over decades. Every night, Elsie is alone. Every storm, alone. When she dies, Monowi ceases to exist, not in some metaphorical sense, but administratively. The town will literally be unincorporated. What Monowi represents isn't quaint Americana. It's the slow extinction event happening to rural America in real time. There are thousands of communities across the Great Plains that are 1 or 2 funerals away from becoming Monowi. They're called zombie towns, places that are technically alive but functionally dying, kept on life support by stubbornness and memory. Driving through Monowi isn't creepy in the horror movie sense. It's creepy in the way that holding someone's hand as they die is creepy. You're witnessing the end of something and you can't stop it. And you weren't even invited to the funeral. Bardstown, Kentucky. They call it the bourbon capital of the world. The tourism board would prefer you focus on that. Bardstown is postcard pretty, rolling Kentucky hills, historic bed and breakfasts, distillery tours that draw whiskey enthusiasts from around the globe. Population around 13,000. It's won awards for being one of the most beautiful small towns in America. The downtown square looks like something from a Hallmark movie. Families visit, couples get married here. But between 2013 and 2015, something dark took root in Bardstown, something that, as of today, remains largely unexplained, and the body count keeps growing. In May 2013, Officer Jason Ellis was ambushed and executed on a highway exit ramp while driving home from his shift. Someone had placed debris on the road to force him to stop, and then shot him multiple times with a shotgun as he cleared it. Ellis was a K-9 officer, well-liked, with no known enemies. Investigators theorized he may have stumbled onto something. Drug trafficking, perhaps, or corruption. No one has ever been charged. There's more. A local pastor and his wife were killed in a head-on collision with a truck whose driver said his brakes mysteriously failed. The FBI was eventually called in. The podcast and documentary industry descended, and still, answers remain scarce. What makes Bardstown uniquely unsettling isn't just the murders, it's the proximity. In a town this size, everyone knows everyone. The victims were connected through church, through school, through marriage. The suspects walked the same streets as the bereaved. People whisper theories in the distillery tasting rooms, glancing over their shoulders. The bourbon flows, the tourists smile, and somewhere beneath the charm, a rot has set in that no one can name. 5 deaths, 0 convictions, and a town that knows more than it's saying. Would you book a room at one of those quaint little inns? Would you sleep soundly, knowing that in Bardstown, people who ask too many questions have a way of disappearing? Gary, Indiana. There are cities that decline, and then there's Gary, a city that feels like it was abandoned mid-sentence. In 1960, Gary, Indiana had a population of over 178,000. It was a steel town built by by and for U.S. Steel, which constructed the massive Gary Works plant along Lake Michigan at the turn of the 20th century. Workers poured in from the South and from Eastern Europe. The downtown gleamed with department stores, theaters, hotels. The Palace Theater hosted Frank Sinatra. Gary was, for a moment, the model of American industrial prosperity. Today, the population hovers around 69,000, and the reality on the ground is difficult to overstate. Entire neighborhoods have been reclaimed by nature. The Methodist Church, built in 1926 as a Gothic revival masterpiece, sits open to the sky. Its roof collapsed. Orange trees growing through the nave. City Methodist could seat 950 worshipers. Now it holds nothing but pigeons and graffiti. The Palace Theater is a shell. Blocks upon blocks of homes stand empty. Windows shattered. Porches sagging into the earth. Some estimates suggest over 1/3 of the city's structures are abandoned. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was a slow-motion disaster spanning decades. Steel automation reduced the workforce. White flight followed integration. The crack epidemic hit hard in the 1980s. At various points, Gary has had one of the highest murder rates per capita in the nation. In 2014, the bodies of 7 women were discovered in abandoned houses, victims of a serial killer who had used the city's emptiness as cover. Walking through Gary's abandoned zones is like walking through a time capsule that someone dropped and shattered. You can see the ambition in the architecture, the cornices, the brickwork, the grand plans, and you can see exactly when the ambition died. Every building is a before and after photograph. Frozen at the moment of collapse. Gary is still a functioning city, technically. People live here. People work here. But driving down Broadway, past the vacant lots and the boarded windows and the silence, you can't help but feel that you're witnessing something America doesn't like to admit exists. Not history, not memory, just abandonment, stretching on for miles. Skidmore, Missouri. On July 10th, 1981, a man named Ken Rex McElroy was shot to death while sitting in his pickup truck on Skidmore's main street. It was broad daylight. There were at least 46 witnesses. No one saw anything. To this day, no one has ever been charged. And if you ask the residents of Skidmore, most of them will tell you, off the record, with a meaningful look, that justice was served. Ken Rex McElroy spent decades terrorizing this small farming community of about 300 people. He was accused of assault, arson, child molestation, statutory rape, and attempted murder. And McElroy was convicted, but released on bond pending appeal. That was the final straw. The morning of his death, a town meeting was called. The sheriff, conveniently, left town. When McElroy walked out of the local bar and got into his truck, someone or several someones opened fire. His wife, sitting beside him, was not harmed. She identified a shooter. The town said she was lying. What makes Skidmore creepy isn't just the murder. It's the silence that followed. A community made a collective decision to kill a man, and then made an equally collective decision to never speak of it. Journalist Harry N. McLean wrote a book about it, in broad daylight, and even he couldn't crack the code. The people of Skidmore have kept their secret for over 40 years. There's a version of this story that feels like justice, and there's a version that feels like something darker. A reminder that law is only as strong as the people who enforce it, and that communities can decide quietly that some lives aren't worth protecting. Would you stop for gas in Skidmore? Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. A town that changed its name for a game show has no business being this dark. In 1950, the small desert community of Hot Springs, New Mexico accepted a challenge from the NBC radio program Truth or Consequences. Rename your town after the show and host the program's anniversary broadcast. They did, and the name stuck. What didn't stick was any sense that the town was somehow protected by its absurdity, because Truth or Consequences became the hunting ground of David Parker Ray, one of the most sadistic serial offenders in American criminal history. Ray, a local mechanic, operated what he called his toy box, a soundproof trailer equipped with surgical instruments, restraints, and audio recordings that he would play for his victims, describing in clinical detail what he intended to do to them. Ray was arrested in 1999 after one of his victims escaped. He was convicted of kidnapping and torture, though investigators believe he may have killed as many as 60 women, most of whose bodies were never found. He died in prison in 2002. The town doesn't talk about David Parker Ray. The local economy depends on retirees and tourists attracted to the hot springs. The quirky name is the draw, but beneath that veneer, there's a weight. The knowledge that for decades, someone was operating a nightmare factory in the desert and nobody knew. Truth or Consequences is beautiful in its way. The desert light, the mineral baths, the old adobe architecture, but you can't unknow what you know, and the question lingers. In a place this remote, this quiet, quiet, what else might go unnoticed? Libby, Montana. If you want to understand how a corporation can kill a town and walk away, drive to Libby. Nestled in the mountains of northwestern Montana, Libby looks like a postcard. Forested hillsides, the Kootenai River running clear and cold, small town storefronts on Mineral Avenue, population around 3,000. It's the kind of place people move to for the quiet, for the beauty, for the clean mountain air. Except for decades, the air in Libby was poison. From 1919 to 1990, the W.R. Grace Company operated a vermiculite mine on Zonalite Mountain, just outside town. Vermiculite is a mineral used in insulation, gardening products, and construction materials. The Libby mine produced most of the world's supply. What W.R. Grace knew, and what Libby's residents didn't, was that the vermiculite was contaminated with tremolite asbestos, one of the most lethal forms of the mineral. For 70 years, miners came home covered in dust. They hugged their children. They washed their clothes in family machines. Kids played in vermiculite piles like they were sandboxes. The company handed it out free for use in gardens and driveways. It was everywhere. In the walls of the high school, in the ice rink, in the soil. By the time the EPA arrived in 1999, the damage was catastrophic. Hundreds of residents had died from asbestos-related diseases, mesothelioma, asbestosis, lung cancer. Hundreds more were sick. Entire families had been wiped out. Internal documents revealed that W.R. Grace had known about the contamination since at least the 1960s and had actively concealed it. What makes Libby so deeply disturbing isn't just the death toll, it's the intimacy of it. This wasn't a distant factory poisoning a water supply. This was neighbors giving each other bags of contaminated material as a gift. A company that watched it happen for decades and did the math on whether it was cheaper to let people die than to tell the truth. Libby is beautiful. The mountains are still there. The river still runs, but there's a memorial downtown with over 400 names on it. Names of people who died breathing their own town. Oh, how do you trust anything after that? Villisca, Iowa. On the night of June 10th, 1912, someone entered a small white house in Villisca, Iowa, and murdered 8 people with an axe. 6 of them were children. The killer was never found. The victims were Josiah and Sarah Moore, their 4 children, and 2 young girls who were sleeping over after attending a church event earlier that evening. All were killed in their beds, their faces covered with cloth after death. The axe was left behind, wiped clean. The investigation that followed was a catastrophe of false confessions, bungled evidence, and jurisdictional fighting. A traveling minister named George Kelly confessed, recanted, and was tried twice, both trials ending without conviction. Suspicion also fell on a state senator and a local businessman, but nothing stuck. The town turned on itself, accusations flying for years. Today, the Villisca Axe Murder House is open for tours. You can pay to spend the night. It's become a destination for paranormal investigators and true crime tourists, which is either a form of tribute or a form of exploitation, depending on your perspective. Some crimes are solved, some are closed, and some just linger, like a stain that won't come out no matter how many years pass. Butte, Montana. Welcome to the richest hill on earth. Welcome to the place that might poison an entire watershed forever. Butte, Montana was once the largest city between Chicago and San Francisco. At its peak in the early 1900s, over 100,000 people lived here, drawn by the copper buried in the earth beneath their feet. The mines of Butte powered the electrical revolution, the wiring for the nation's homes, the infrastructure of the modern world. Copper barons became some of the wealthiest men in America. The Anaconda Company controlled politics, newspapers, entire state governments. What they left behind is a hole in the earth filled with poison water and a bill that will come due forever. The Berkeley Pit is a former open-pit copper mine over a mile wide and nearly 2,000 feet deep. When mining ceased in 1982, the pumps that had kept groundwater out were shut off. The pit began to fill. Rain, snowmelt, groundwater seeping through thousands of miles of underground tunnels and mine shafts, all of it mixing with the heavy metals and sulfuric acid left behind. And here's the thing that should keep you up at night. The water is rising. The pit fills by about 5 million gallons every day. At current rates, it will reach the critical water level within the next decade or two, the point at which it begins to spill into the local groundwater and, eventually, into the Clark Fork River, which flows into the Columbia and ultimately the Pacific Ocean. So there you have it. 10 towns you probably shouldn't visit, not because they're haunted, but because they're real. What connects them them isn't a genre, it isn't a legend, it's a pattern. Economic extraction that leaves communities hollowed out, violence that gets buried instead of addressed, isolation that bends people into strange new shapes, the slow, grinding truth that some places in America were used up and thrown away. We tell ourselves that small towns are wholesome, that they're the heartland, the backbone, the real America, and some of them are, but some of them are warnings, some of them are crime scenes, some of them are just waiting. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been to any of these places? Would you go now that you know? And if you're still watching, still thinking about these towns as you scroll to the next video, ask yourself how many Centralias are out there, burning quietly while the rest of us look away. Subscribe if you want more, and thanks for watching.